scripture reading today comes from the book of Acts, chapter 17, verse 24. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples built by human hands. And he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. From one man he made all the nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth. And he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands. God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. This is the word of the Lord.
In visiting time, it's great to be able to connect as a community of faith. I tell you, it's one of my favorite parts of our service. Is being able to, I don't know, just to go beyond sitting next to each other, go beyond sitting, especially as we're at different tables, the way we have it set up here. We can kind of do look like we're all separated out, but see, and if you thought somebody might think that, somebody might come into this worship service and say, oh, they're all separated, they're all in different places. But see, we blow that right out of the water with our greeting time. We all get up, we all visit, and then what else? Community, right? We're all up, we're all at the table together, and that's when that's when I can feel the most united. And also there, of course, during prayer, united. And there's something about a windy day, too, that windy day always reminds me of God's Spirit. And we certainly have a windy day outside. We remind us of God's Spirit here, moving among us, even though we're safe from that cold wind outside. We got the warm wind of God's Spirit. All right, a whole year ahead of us. My goodness, what are we going to do with this year that we have ahead? Like I said before, there's going to be good times and there's going to be tough times. There are going to be ways that we are just going to feel really encouraged to get closer to God and closer to our community. And then there are times when we are going to find a stumbling block along the way. And it's going to trip us up and it's going to take us farther from God. Take us farther from our community, and that's what I want to talk about today. It's not the most upbeat sermon for the new year, but it is important. I think it can help us just to have even a more bountiful, joyful year where we feel closer and closer to God, where we feel closer and closer to one another. And the thing, the stumbling block that I want us to look out for is that old sting of rejection. Because we're all going to feel it at some point in this year. It's something that happens to us over and over again throughout our lives. Sometimes it's the person closest to us that makes us feel rejected. And sometimes it's a complete stranger. Sometimes it happens face to face. Right when we're talking to somebody, right when we're interacting with them, they say something, they do something that makes us feel like they don't really care about us. Or they don't want to know us. And sometimes, of course, it can happen via email or via text message. And that can just, even those can throw us off, can make us feel like we're rejected. Well, I know we all probably have memories about that, but we think back to times in our lives when we particularly felt that, when we felt this profound feeling of rejection. And the one I have happened to be a long, long time ago. It happened actually when I was way back in high school. And I was playing football. And I tell you, I love playing football in high school. It was one of the great times in my life. I really enjoyed it, especially junior and senior year. We had a lot of talented guys on the team. I wasn't very good myself, but I was surrounded by talented people, so they kind of helped lifted me up, made me a little bit better. I wasn't a great player, but every once in a while I make a good play, and that was always fun. And I knew the guys on the team real well. So it was great. I had a great 2 years, junior and senior year, playing football. So why is my number one, most profound, most crystal clear memory of football, not from those 2 seasons, but from the first game of my 9th grade year. The very first game of 9th grade year, I remember going out there and being so excited as we warmed up, being so excited as the kickoff occurred. But what I remember most about that game was the fact that I did not play one single down the entire game. I remember that very clearly. I remember the fact that everybody else on the team got to play some, at least. I was the only one that didn't get to play. I wasn't that good a player, so this kind of makes sense in the 9th grade. the ninth grade. But I also remember this. I remember that my father, it was a ninth grade game, it was kind of during the day. My father had made a special effort to be there. It was right in the middle of his work day. He was there, and he was up in the stands, and I remember one quarter after another passing, and never being picked to go in. Never being selected to go in. And I'll tell you, I think it says something about the sting of rejection, even though all I'm talking about here is a game. This is a football game. And I was, 14 years old. But boy, I just felt that sting of rejection in the face of all of that, all the work I'd done, all the practice I had done. And we've all felt that way. And it's not just something we feel when we're young. We may think, oh gosh, that's just from when we're kids, from when we're teenagers. That's when we feel rejected. Then, the comment comes. The little remark or the invitation never arrives. Or somebody in our lives just decides they don't want to be a part of our lives. And then that rejection, you feel it. What do we do with it? And what does God tell us? What is I don't know, how can we avoid, I guess, falling into the trap of rejection? Because you know what the trap of rejection is somebody rejects us and all of a sudden, okay, well, I don't want to be a part of that. I want to step back from it. I don't want to be a part of anything. I want to be on my own. And we tend to back away from community and back away from others. And we can even back away from our relationship with God because of this rejection that we've experienced. Well, how do we avoid that? What do we do with it? Well, one thing we need to do is absolutely recognize that one of the big messages in the gospel, good news, and specifically in the four gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, is the lesson of rejection. Jesus experienced rejection over and over and over again. The early people in the early church experienced rejection and persecution from those around them. We hear lessons about that. We go and see who Jesus is coming to minister to. When he comes into a new town, who is he looking for? Well, he's looking up in the tree at Zacchaeus. He's looking out over there at the 10 lepers. He's looking at the people who are rejected. Or rejection, you just can't get far in the Gospels, the reading of the Gospels, the study of what's important, about what leads us closer to God, what helps us to be more good followers of Jesus Christ. You're going to see these lessons of feeling and being rejected. And it happened to Jesus himself. Well, it was probably one of the principal experiences of his ministry. Of course, yes, he was accepted by so many. And he was so popular, he was such a great healer, and he was a speaker who people would listen to. And over again, people made it clear to him, you are not acceptable to us. You are not okay to us. We don't like you. And eventually, we hate you. We are going to kill you. And that was the message Jesus was getting from others. And we see that right there at the beginning of his ministry. One of the very first things that happens in the Gospel of Luke is Jesus goes to his hometown. And he's preaching and everything's going great. As he starts out by saying, I've come for the oppressed. I've come for the blind. I've come for the imprisoned. That's who I've come here for. And everybody in the congregation was going, yeah, right on. That's it. I'm oppressed. I feel like I'm in prison. But then Jesus went on to say, not just you. I'm here for the people that you have oppressed. I am here for the people that you have imprisoned. I am here for the people that you have rejected. And right then the crowd went from loving Jesus to hating him. Right then they went from being happy to being angry. See, Jesus, the one who was sticking up for the rejected, the one who was there saying, here is who I am here for. I am here for those who are rejected. Himself then, because of that, is rejected by his hometown. The place he grew up. The very synagogue where he worshiped God, where he had his bar mitzvah, where he became a man. All that was happening right in that place. Boy, we talk about the sting of rejection. I don't know how keenly Jesus felt it. I think he must have felt it in his heart. He must have. He was fully human after all. But what tempered that sting, I'm sure for him, was the fact that he was also fully divine. He was God's son. And so even knowing that all these people didn't like him, all these people were angry with him, he knew God was smiling upon him. He knew that God loved him. And that had to help him over that time. At a time of being rejected by those closest to him, that had to help him until he could get back to his people, his disciples. talk with them, and then feel that community come once again and feel good about that. Feel good about himself and about others, and want again to be close to. Well, Jesus certainly was a man who understood what it was, the sting of rejection. Now, what can we then do with this story, and then really all the stories we read in the Bible about rejection, from Jesus to those who were suffering and that he helped, to the members of the early church? How do they help us today? What can we learn from them? Well, as in a lot of lessons in the gospel here, for us there is a warning and there is a promise. And the first part of the warning is you got to be careful, because in this world, the reason that rejection exists, the reason that so many people experience it, and we experience it so often, is that we are so good at becoming rejectors. We're so good at drawing circles that leave other people out. So the warning for us, and the thing we need to keep in mind, is, drawing a circle that keeps others out, that's not our job. That's God's job. If we want to think about judgment and think about who's in and who's out, well, it's certainly the one thing the Bible makes clear to us: judgment is not our responsibility. Judgment is God's responsibility. And so here, as we're thinking about this, thinking about the old sting of rejection that we experience in our lives, let's not forget that it is very easy for us to fall into that role of being a rejector of other people. The philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre said that all that it takes to make a community is two people who exclude a third. That's all it takes. And so how tempting that is. What an easy community that is to make, if I'm just going to build a community about who is out, not who is in. It's one reason I love our scripture reading for today. Our scripture reading today comes from Acts, and it's Paul, and he's speaking to the people in Athens. And they're all pagans there, right? And he's talking to them, and he's trying to explain who God is and God's love. And as a part of that explanation, he said, all people are descended from the one person that God made. And then we split up into different nations. And then each nation on its own searches for God, gropes for God, and perhaps finds him. For God is nearer to us all than we think. To me, this reminds me that this whole world is God's community. God created all of us here, and all of us in this world. And so to remember that this world is God's community can also help us remember we've got to make sure that we're not the rejectors, not the ones keeping people out. Instead of seeing others as someone, instead of looking at someone and seeing them as somebody on the outside, to look at them and to see them as a part of God's community, as a child of God. But there's more than just a warning here, of course. There is a promise. And the promise to us is that we can come to know God. In fact, we can come to be fully accepted by God through Jesus Christ. When we accept Christ into our lives, into our hearts, God doesn't just become friends with us. God just doesn't become pals with us. We are adopted by God. We become God's children. We become here brothers and sisters in Christ. We are joined together. And what that means for us is that in our lives, when we do face times when we are rejected, when someone turns their back on us, when some group makes it clear they don't want to be, they don't want us in that group, when that happens, we can be inspired. We'll feel the sting, absolutely. But is that going to be the final word? Are we going to turn away from community? Are we going to turn away from others? No, because God is going to be there in that moment to inspire us and to remind us of God's great love for us. And the love that exists here in God's community. It was later that evening after that game back in 9th grade, and I was at home. My mother was out somewhere, and I remember it was just my dad and I there for dinner, and he was doing all he could to cheer me up, and really all I was thinking about was, why should I stay on a team that doesn't need me, doesn't seem to want me? One thing I didn't add, that they won the game. They didn't even need me to win. They won the game without me. Why should I stay on this team? Why shouldn't they rejected me? Why shouldn't I reject them right back? My dad was doing his best to cheer me up, but I think mostly he was saying things like, well, you know, David, I couldn't call the school and complain, but I know you probably wouldn't like that. I was like, yeah, Dad, I don't want you to do that. Thank you, though. But then he said something I'll always remember. He said, David, when I was in high school, I didn't play sports. I didn't play any sports at all. I'm just proud you're out there. I'm proud you're part of the team. I'm proud that you're doing your best. That's all you ever need to do. And there, in the midst of that moment of really memorable rejection for me, came these words, very simple, that helped me keep going. No, I didn't quit. That's all I needed to keep going the next day, then the next day after that. And soon other reasons to stay on the team came. I became better at my position, and friendships on the team began to grow. And I'd like to say that the very next week I scored the winning touchdown. No, didn't do that. Darn it. Never scored the winning touchdown, as a matter of fact. But what I needed in that moment was a sense of, love, a sense of encouragement. And I think God gave that to me through my father. And that's the promise that we can all claim. Whenever we face a moment of rejection in our lives, whenever we face a time feeling that, maybe it's not even a moment of rejection, maybe it's just a feeling like we're on the outside looking in. We can be inspired by God. We can be moved by God to keep going. Keep trying, to remember that rejection is a part of being a friend, it's a part of being a spouse, it's a part of being in a community. And to keep going and to feel, those connections with others being repaired. Because God inspired us in that moment to stick with it. Well, that's my prayer for us today. Is that through the power of Jesus Christ, through the example of his ministry and the power of his death and the wonder of his resurrection, that even in our darkest moments, even in our moments of rejection, we will continue to feel God's love and we will keep going. Let's bow in prayer. Loving God, we give thanks that you are always with us, even in our darkest moments. Dear Lord, we do ask when we're facing difficult times, when we're feeling the sting of rejection, Lord, help us to hear your voice, the voice of a loved one. Help us to feel or hear or sense a whispered word of inspiration from you, that we may keep going, drawing closer and closer to you and never turn away from community, never turn away from the love of others.